Welcome, everyone, to our first ever Writers for the Sea book club. We're going to be talking about Rockaway, surfing headlong into a new life with Diane Cardwell. Very excited to be here today. My name is Natasha Benjamin. I'm with Blue Frontier, and I've been working in marine science and conservation for almost 20 years, and am helping put together events for Writers for the Sea, which is a group of over 100 writers that from nonfiction to fiction to memoirs, writers that write about the ocean, that write about the sea, and everything that goes with it. Today, we're going to be focused on surfing. And if you would like to find out more about the book club and get involved with Writers for the Sea, please join our Writers for the Sea Facebook group. And I'll also put my email in the chat for those that are not on Facebook and would like to email me and get involved. I'm very excited to be here with Diane today to talk about her memoir. Diane Cardwell is a founder of Vibe magazine and a former reporter and editor for the New York Times, where she ranged wide over 2 decades on all sorts of different issues, which we'll talk a little bit more about. She was also the writer of Portraits of Grief, the signature profile of those killed in the 9/11 attacks. And she covered alternative energy and politics and urban development and surfing in her reporting throughout the years. She is with us tonight from Rockaway, New York, where she lives and surfs and gardens. And I am really excited to talk about this book, which I read recently and definitely resonated for me as a fellow New Yorker who grew up in Manhattan before I started surfing, but also someone who, for me, I learned how to surf during kind of what we call, I guess some call a midlife crisis, but what I actually call my midlife awakening. And I'm very excited to talk about the book and to talk, of course, about surfing, because that's what us surfers want to do. And so, Diane, welcome to Writers for the Sea Book Club.
Thank
Very
you so
excited
much.
to have you.
Very happy to be here.
Wonderful. Is there anything else about kind of your background that you want the audience to know?
No, not really. I mean, the one thing I will say, it's funny because having grown up in Manhattan, as Natasha did, you don't really, well, I managed to live here my entire life and didn't know that there was surfing. So it's amazing to me how something so surprising and kind of distant, from my life could end up being so profound. But
yes, same here. Grew up in New York. Not a surfer at the time, but always leaving New York to go to other places to be in the ocean.
Right.
Not really experiencing it. Most people don't think of Manhattan as a surf destination or New York City as a surf.
City, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about kind of your experience over the last decade or two, and what brought you to writing this book.
So let's see, how do I begin?
Where do you start?
Where do I start? So I guess maybe I'll start with the moment that kind of inspired the transition, and then that ended up inspiring the book, which was I was sort of in middle age. I was about 44, 45. I was divorced, kind of trying to figure out how to be on my own. I didn't have kids. I was still trying to answer questions for myself about how and if and whether I was actually going to be a mother or not. And I was working at the New York Times as a reporter covering the New York hospitality industry, and I got this idea that, the restaurant industry goes out to the Hamptons for the summer, and so I should go do a story out there. And a friend of mine suggested that I do a story about this hotel, the Montauk in Montauk, that was up for sale and what this meant and so on and so forth. And so I went and I thought, I should probably talk to some surfers. I've heard this is a surf town. I was not interested in surfing at all. I never had been. Popular Image did not appeal to me, right? Like Jeff Spicoli was not one of my heroes. And I frankly thought you had to be insane to want to surf, because all I'd ever seen was those Wide World of Sports, kind of, I think they're shot at like, I don't know whether it's Pipeline or what, but it was just like tiny little people on enormous waves. And I just thought, who wants to do that? So anyway, so I went to the surf beach to interview people in Montauk, and I was just sort of dumbstruck. There were these like small peeling waves. The surfers looked like dancers, and I just got this idea of, maybe I could do that. And so I ended up coming back for lessons, and eventually found my way to Rockaway, and really changed my life a lot. Became much more focused on not just surfing, but generally kind of being happy and kind of wrapping my life around being happy, as opposed to trying to find little spaces to be happy in between all the obligations. And then, sort of not very long into my making a home and getting to know the surf community, Sandy hit and pretty much devastated the community here. And in the few days after the storm, an editor that I'd known at Vogue like emailed me, and I think I didn't get the email for several days because I had to get off the peninsula to where there was some power to get an internet connection. And so, but he was like, I seem to think that you moved to Rockaway to kind of to escape and have this great life, and now things are, I don't know what's going on, but you like, would you be interested in writing a personal essay about this? And he told me what he could pay me. And I thought, okay, great, I'll do it, because that will buy me a new boiler, right? It's like at that point, I didn't know what was going to happen. So I wrote the essay in kind of a fugue state, and that got published, and it was
That was
kind
the
of
one
about,
in the New York Times.
no, that was actually in Vogue. And so
Okay.
that was sort of the first time that I'd written about my experience and kind of seen it as a contained or containable story that had an appeal for a lot of people. I mean, I got tremendous response for it. I had people, coming up to me on the beach saying, oh my God, it's so good to see you in Rockaway, right? Because my picture had run with the essay. So I kind of put that in the back of my mind. And then, we went through the recovery and rebuilding. Life got back to a new kind of normal. And a friend of mine at the Times said, why don't you write an essay for the style section about how surfing changed your life? Because she was actually at the time thinking that she thought there was a book in this. I didn't. But writing that essay, which had the headline, Surfing Headlong Into a New Life, made me see that I had a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I kind of knew that the story begins with me standing on that beach in Montauk and feeling something shift in me. Somewhere in the middle-ish would be Sandy. And then the end is me and Rockaway really happy and actually even in love and feeling very kind of committed to this new life and having resolved a lot of questions for myself. So that's the sort of long, slightly long-winded version of how I came to write the book.
Mm-hmm. And I love how you describe, trying to create a lifestyle of what you were considered happiness at that moment.
Right.
And you left Manhattan, you bought a place in Rockaway, you found community, and you found surfing. I mean, surfing is one piece of it, but there was so much more to that whole experience.
Well, part of it, I think, and I imagine that the many, any surfers here will understand this, that I mean, surfing is about surfing, right? I mean, there is nothing, there's nothing to replace that feeling of riding the wave and being on it, and that magic motor from the deep, as I call it sometimes. But it is also, it puts you in relation with other people differently. It puts you in relation with the ocean differently. It changes the way you think about time and schedules and obligations, because you have to go when the wave tells you to go. You don't get to decide, you know what, I'm gonna schedule that wave for 3 o'clock on Monday afternoon, right? So you literally have to shift your entire life around it if you want to have more opportunities to get more waves.
Which is what you need to get better, especially
Right.
when you start surfing midlife.
Right, 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 right.
As we know, it's probably one of the hardest sports to learn at any point in your life, but especially midlife, because the wave is different every single time you go out.
Every single
The
time.
conditions are different.
Right.
The wind is different.
Right.
The shape of the wave, the way it moves.
Right.
It's almost like starting over again.
Right. Well, and also it demands so much. I mean, it demands so many kinds of physical skills and abilities, right? Like, you have to be flexible, you have to be strong, you have to have balance, you have to have stamina. You need full body strength for it, full body flexibility. And so, I don't know, I think it combines a lot of aspects of a lot of other sports in a kind of unique way. Although I also think that everybody who loves a sport says that about their sport.
Right.
So I think
for sure. Everything is different. I think so. So was there ever a moment during, as you've been surfing over the last, so it's been about what, I want to say 10 years?
I think it's been 10 years. Yeah.
Where you
never know it from looking at me in the water. Sure.
I hear you.
Still like flailing and kooky out there.
But it doesn't really matter, right? Like, I mean, the days that I'm in the water and I don't catch a wave are as good as any day. It's really about being in the water.
Yeah.
And you do describe a couple moments. I think it was in the beginning of the book in Puerto Rico, where you weren't sure if you were going to make it. And that's not the only time the ocean has almost got you.
Yes.
So can you talk about kind of that relationship with the ocean and
well, it's interesting. So that time in Puerto Rico, I was literally like, I was literally questioning, like, am I going to be able to get out of this current and get back? And I was like, oh my God. And then I was just sort of mad. I was like, this is ridiculous. You can't die here. Like, your friends are right there. It's beautiful. What are you talking about? Right. So, like, get back there and battle and, scream and do whatever you need to get back. But that was kind of a scary and instructive experience for me, because I had grown up spending a lot of time in the ocean. My family, my father's uncle had a house in Cape Cod. My mother would take me there for summers. I learned to swim at the ocean, but I was always on the bay side of an ocean beach, so a sort of a slightly calmer situation. Yep. So I didn't have a lot of experience with current,
open ocean,
tides, and ocean, and also the Pacific, which is just different. Like, the Atlantic has its dangers, but the Pacific, there's something special about it, I think, especially scary. But yeah, so the thing about going through Sandy for me was just the kind of push me, pull you of the ocean, in a way that, like, here is this thing, this natural phenomenon that is so soothing and nurturing and, like the balm to everything in my life. And yet it almost killed me. It almost swept me off my feet. And it has, like, ripped apart houses. I mean, the day that I walked down the beach to a couple neighborhoods down and saw that literally it was almost like someone took a big claw and just ripped the facade off of the front of houses, and they were standing at weird angles. And it's just that force is so shocking in a way, but I still want to be near it and next to it. So that's what I mean about, I guess, about being in relation with it, right? Like you understand what it can do, and you do
Mhm.
everything that you can to mitigate against that and avoid being out in that. But at the same time, it's also just like, wow, look at what
The
that
the
ocean
awe.
can do. It's just awe-inspiring in some way.
And I think you hear this from shark attack survivors.
Hmm.
Many of them return to the ocean,
Right, right,
and there's an awe and a respect that
right,
you have to have when you
right,
put yourself in the ocean
right,
at any moment. I mean, you
right,
don't know what's going to happen,
right.
and I think for people who get hooked on surfing or any kind of water sport, where they it's you can't really stop that
Hmm.
draw,
Right, right,
and it's going to take a lot to
right,
really get you not to come back.
right, right. Well, it was interesting. I remember, and I do write about this a little bit in the book, and I think back to like the day before the storm really hit. Um, and actually the morning of, and I was sort of out walking around, and I literally couldn't stop myself from like looking and seeing. I mean, it was just because it was just so amazing to me how, I mean, it was terrifying, but it was just amazing to me like how big the waves were and how like rock like they looked in a way. And so it's yeah, I think once the ocean has its hooks in you, it doesn't let go.
Yeah. And I'm curious, I mean, you wrote this book many years later
Right.
from when a lot of this happened. How does that work as a writer to relive and recreate those stories?
Right. Well, it's a process. It's not easy.
Hmm.
So part of the thing for me was that, I'm not a journaler. I've never been a journaler. And so I literally spent a year, like the better part of a year when I was really seriously writing the book, kicking myself practically every day, just like, oh God, if you just get to journal, you could you would be able to remember this so well.
Right.
Um, so that was a little frustrating for me, but what on the flip side, I have, I'm not very good at cleaning out my email box and my inbox, and I have all of my calendars, and so I had a different kind of record of things that had happened, and so I was able to kind of mine that to help me remember. It's like, oh, okay, I remember when that must have been, because here's an email exchange that I had with my friend about that.
Hmm.
And so that was very, very helpful. But the other thing I'd say, just in terms of writing, and especially when you're sort of writing from life, whether it's a novel or nonfiction, I find that just like I'll start with just a snippet of a memory, and I'll just kind of sit with it, and then start like writing down how I remember it. And a lot of times memories just come from that. They just flow. Like the act of remembering makes you
Hmm.
remember more.
Did
Um,
you try to go back to some of those places to
I did.
recreate the smells and the
I
feelings and
did.
the
I
sensations?
did. I
Yep.
did. So I went back to Montauk,
Hmm.
and sort of sat at the bar at the Montauk, and it's like,
Right.
okay, right, I remember this happening. And I didn't go back to Puerto Rico, and I didn't go back to California, but I did go back to like, there's a scene that happens at I can't remember, is it the Nat King Cole or Bemelman's bar? And so I did go back to Bemelman's bar in, at a fancy hotel, just to remember like where would I have been sitting, and what would I have seen,
Hmm.
when I had this conversation. But it's all, the other thing though is that, as a writing teacher once said to me, memory is a fiction writer. And so I was like, okay, memory is a fiction writer, got to remember that. So when I had gotten through most of it, I actually shared pages with not every single person, but almost everyone, certainly everyone who's named, but almost everyone in the book, to say like, okay, here is how I remember this happening. Do you remember it this way? Do you
Right.
remember something different? And a couple of people were like, I think that's right, but I think I was wearing something different, or I think
Or
that
what's
that
his
was
name was also there. Or,
right, right,
yeah.
right. So that was like the reporter in me, where I was just like, I have access to these people. I should use that access to make sure that I'm, accurately, or as accurately and fully and honestly, recording this stuff and putting it out there in the world.
How different is it as a journalist who writes mostly in short form to go from that to writing a long, memoir and a full book? How was that experience? And do you want to do it
Terrifying.
again?
It's terrifying. I mean, it really was terrifying. There were days that I literally like took to my bed and did not get out. I was just like, I can't, because I just felt like I had promised so much and that I wasn't going to be able to sustain it over, 250 pages or what have you. But the one thing I will say though, that having been a journalist really helps, and especially having been both an editor and a writer, is that I think a lot in terms of structure. And so for me, it was very important to know the structure of the book before I started writing it. And so I didn't have everything outlined, but
Right.
I had a sense of like where things would fall. And once I'd written like about 3 chapters, I then felt like I have to outline this chapter by chapter. And some of that changed over the course of writing, but just having that roadmap made me feel like, okay, and I was like, I can approach each chapter like a separate thing, as long as you make sure that it flows, um, and that, I, that it's paced right and all of that. But that was the thing that gave me great comfort in my
I'm a
times
little.
of like total insecurity and like, I am not up to this at all.
And after reading the book, I mean, it touches on so many different aspects of your life and New York
Mhm,
and
mhm.
what Rockaway went through and the hurricane and how our world is changing.
Right.
Um, did you have a goal going in of what you wanted readers to kind of walk away with? Um,
I did. I mean, I had a number of goals. I mean, one, I wanted them to walk away with sort of a love and fascination with Rockaway, right? Which is, I mean, Rockaway is the other big character in this book, because
right.
I think it is such a special place, and I think it is a kind of rare kind of place that we don't have enough of, either in New York or maybe even the world. But the real the drive to write the book was, I wanted readers to walk away with a sense that they could make them try to be happy at any point in their life, that it was never too late to try to make your life what you want it to be, and to pursue something that you may be terrible at, but that gives you great joy, and that is enough.
Mhm. Well, that definitely resonates for me, and
Yeah.
I'm sure many other surfers,
Mhm.
that even if you're not good at it, there is so much more than that.
Right.
Just being in the
Right.
water, and I know you and I were talking about this yesterday, actually.
Yeah.
What being in the water, what it physically
Hmm.
and emotionally does for someone.
Right.
And there's this whole concept of blue mind, which Wallace J. Nichols wrote a book about, of what happens to your physiology and your entire mindset when you are in and around the water.
Hmm.
And for us ocean and water lovers, there's a reason we keep going back. And I mean, I think for many of us, especially during the last 2 years, the ocean was our refuge, our
Hmm.
place to reconnect,
Hmm.
and to heal. And I mean,
Right.
for it's saltwater therapy.
Right.
after what we were going through.
Right.
And, at the beginning of the pandemic, they closed a lot of the beaches here on the West Coast. I'm not sure what happened in New York.
No, they didn't close them here.
Well, they tried to close them here.
Yeah.
And we all kind of stayed away and tried to respect a lot of the local communities, especially with some of the smaller towns along the West Coast where we were all scared, and no one, they didn't want a bunch of, out of town surfers showing up at their beach. Right. And I remember talking to all my surf buddies, who were normally texting, when are we going out? When are we going out? It's like, can we go? Can we go? When can we go?
When can we go? Right.
Looking for the next window, the next weather window.
Right. Well, it's funny when I think the pandemic did a couple of things. I mean, obviously everybody and their mother decided that they wanted to be a surfer, right? So every break became flooded with newbies. But it was interesting here because what I just literally felt like I could not have been luckier than to live in Rockaway and be a surfer, because technically, you should be socially distancing in the water, right? Like it's kind of a perfect pandemic
like
sport.
board length
length.
Apart.
That's gonna be at least 6 feet, right? So and the breezes, and you can be outside, and so I felt very, very lucky to have the ocean in my backyard throughout this ordeal.
Yeah. Being close to nature. I mean, I was thinking about my dad and family and friends who live in Manhattan. And I just felt so fortunate. I mean, I'm not on the beach, but I have access here in the Bay Area and the East Bay to be able to go outside and get to a body of water pretty easily. I don't have to get in an elevator to get out of my apartment.
Very important. Right. No, these are things that I became just really conscious of. Like, I didn't choose this place because we're, thinking of like, oh, what would be a good place to weather a pandemic? But it turned out to be a great place for that.
Can you talk a little bit about the community in Rockaway around surfing? I mean, I think for all of us who spend time in the water, it's in many ways a solo experience, but the community piece of it is equally as important. I go surfing alone, but I'd rather go out with my buddies and cheer each other on. And if someone sees your wave, catch that wave, it's different than when you catch the wave and no one sees it.
Right.
And I know that you talk about that in the book, and the the people that you met, and your surf instructors from the beginning.
Yep, who are still out here. I mean, one of them is my neighbor. Well, one lives across the street and one lives, through the alley. But it's funny. I feel like I found some lucky little corner of the surf world because, surfers are not always the most welcoming group in the world, right? We're kind of a tribal bunch, and there's always, somebody's always giving you the side eye and trying to, suss you up and suss you out. And but here I found that everyone was really, really welcoming, especially in the water. And that, it was sort of easy to get to know people from the boardwalk, in the water. And then after Sandy, the community just so came together, and everybody helped each other out. And I don't know if that's partly because, this is such a Land's End community, right? We're like basically as far south as you can get without falling into the ocean. So, and it's not been very well served necessarily by government and social services and economics and investment. And so there is, I think, a sense that we're kind of out here on our own. And because so many of us have made the commitment to live here because of our relationship to the ocean and this ecosystem and the landscape, whether you're a surfer or not, that automatically gives us a kind of point of connection. And so it's easier, I find, here than in many other parts of New York that I've lived, to take the next step into having a real relationship, because there's such a basis already of commonality just in
Right.
living here, and
Just
sort
the
of putting up with
location.
what we have to put up with, the long commutes, the slow, sad winter, to be out here by the ocean because we all love it.
Mm-hmm. And, your description of what the community obviously went through during the hurricane and post-hurricane, I'm wondering how that changed your perspective. I mean, you obviously stayed.
Right.
Did
Right.
some people leave?
Yeah.
And what, I mean, these increase in severe hurricanes is something we're seeing,
Yep.
along with climate change, and we know more storms are coming. Rockaway is at sea level. You are a block from the beach.
Yep. Yep.
You
All
walked
true.
through the flooded, the entire, your entire community was flooded and really devastated. What is that? How do you come out of that? How do you emerge from that?
Well, I think you muddle through, and you sort of take whatever precautions you can, and you lobby for more protections, and hope for the best, right? I honestly don't have a more profound answer than that, right? I mean, we do have jetties that are finally being built, Army Corps of Engineer project, which won't solve everything, but certainly, where there were stone jetties in Sandy, you could see that there was not nearly the damage that there was once the jetties stopped. And so, they're putting in, like, I don't know how many, but a lot, all the way up and down the peninsula. So, and that construction is actually going on as we speak. My house gets rattled every couple mornings. I'm like, oh, they must be building the jetty again. Boulders. You try, I mean, there is a lot of talk about resiliency measures, and I think that, all in different parts of the peninsula, those are going on. But I just think, it never occurred to me to leave. And I was sort of surprised by that in a way. I was like, this is interesting. And literally I'm looking at, like, piles and piles of sand, and the boardwalk on my block, right? My boardwalk, like, these huge sections just came off and came down the block, and there's like a twisted lamppost and it's just weird shapes of things. I'm looking at that and thinking, it never occurred to me to leave. That's funny. but I was so surrounded by people. I mean, some people did leave, just, decided they'd had enough, or their house was, completely destroyed and they couldn't be here anymore. Some came back. And since then, I think Sandy also brought us so much attention that there's been more investment,
Right.
And
More
more
awareness.
conversations around, okay, we have this vibrant community, maybe, leaving it to renaturalize is not the best option here. And maybe we should kind of try to hang on and, do some more interventions so that, this community can continue to exist. I don't know that's forever, right? I mean, sea level rise is pretty scary, and at some point, it may just all go back to the sea. But hopefully that's not this year.
We have a few more years if we're lucky. I just want to encourage whoever is listening to please put your questions, comments, thoughts in the chat or the Q&A. We've got one question here from David Helvarg, our Blue Frontiers Executive Director. Donovan Richards was a city councilman from Rockaway who said the impacts of Sandy made him a climate activist. How many more extreme weather events do you expect to experience and or write about in your lifetime now that you've been through this?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to put a number on them. I hope actually never to experience another extreme
Superstorm.
weather event like that again. Um, I mean, I stayed through the storm out of sort of stupidity in some ways, but also, my neighbors were staying. I was like, oh, well, if I mean, they must know, they've been here. And so, but I would not stay again. I think I would evacuate. I mean, I'm a little bit better at reading weather now than I mean, I understand storms a little bit better now than I did.
For multiple reasons. Yep.
Yeah, but I don't plan to write about more extreme weather again. I mean, I did get sort of fascinated with weather when I was working on the book, because I did want to try to recreate the storm in an accurate way and kind of have it be almost a character in itself. But obviously as a surfer, we're all obsessed with weather and low pressure systems and what have you. But yeah.
Yeah, we kind of get a little obsessive about tracking those things.
Yeah.
Did you, so kind of on that theme, did you have to do a lot of research into kind of the forecasting and the surf forecasting and the storm? And did you end up reading other surf books?
Yeah.
Or books on surfing?
Yeah, I did. So I had read Caught Inside, Daniel Duane's memoir, some years ago. A friend of mine actually sent it to me when I started learning to surf. I love that book.
It's beautiful.
I just think it's a beautiful book. And I had read Barbarian Days long before, basically when it came out. And I read, but in terms of like books that I read while I was researching the book, I read this book called, I think it's called Superstorm, 9 Days Inside Hurricane Sandy. And I will tell you, that is a fantastic book. And I feel like, I either didn't get enough attention or something, because like no one seems to have ever heard of it, but it is fascinating. And it reads, it's like the perfect storm, right? I don't, where you're inside with these, these planes that they fly into the hurricane, which is how they collect data. And I was like, are you kidding me? That's how we find out what's going on with the hurricane, is that people fly. So anyway, but you follow these characters. There are people on the cruise ship. So that was one of the ones that I read. And then the only other one that I can think of that I looked at was there's a book called Pacific Passages, which is a collection. It's like the compilation of surf writings from the very beginning. So it includes like, ancient Hawaiian prayers. It includes some, the Captain Cook's ships, doctors, diary, record his watching surfing, and so and on up to the present. And that just gave me, I mean, I quoted from some of those in the book, but that just gave me a sense of, the kind of literary history of surfing, which I didn't really know before I sat down to write.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I just got to see the documentary film Waterman, which is about Duke Kahanamoku. I'm going to Kahanamoku. We got it. I was hoping not to have to say his name, which is an incredible epic story of Duke, the inventor of surfing, who really brought surfing around the world.
Right.
And I think it's just coming out. I don't know. Did you have a chance to see it?
I haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
I really want to though.
I think they're starting to show it in more places now. It was at the International Ocean Film Festival this past weekend. And it's incredible epic story of his life and the impact he obviously had, really as the father of surfing, bringing his wooden, showing up in Australia to surf. And they're like, well, we don't have surfboards. And he's like, well, let me go cut down a tree and make a surfboard.
Oh my God, that's amazing. That's amazing.
This plank of wood with no fin,
right?
Just like I'm guessing 9-10 foot or longer. Who knows how much it weighed?
Big. Yeah. Well, he supposedly surfed here in Rockaway. And
Okay.
in like when
That
he was
wasn't,
doing that kind of world tour, I think it was like 1912, 1913, something like that. It was, I think, either on his way back from the Olympics or on his way to the
okay.
Olympics. And
Okay.
I could not find any actual documentation of him riding a surfboard in Rockaway, but he did apparently put on some kind of swimming, body surfing demonstration. And so
Wow.
my street was at one point renamed Duke Kahanamoku Way, but he did put on an actual surfing demonstration in New Jersey, in Atlantic City,
Mhm.
near like one of the big piers. That I found like a little newspaper clipping, and he apparently had his brother send him a board, like this like huge redwood
Yep.
board from Hawaii that he could, take with him as he began showing surfing and becoming the ambassador of modern surfing.
Right. And becoming the ambassador of surfing, safety rescue in the ocean, swimming, just
Right.
really incredible.
Right.
They
That's
showed
really
they had the story of him saving the capsized boat off Newport Beach, and
Yeah.
pretty remarkable. But I think what that film also highlighted was really, they touched on equity issues, which is
Mhm.
now around surfing and surfing community and
Mhm.
access to the ocean.
Right.
And this is something that's reemerging for him. At that time, traveling the world and talking about surfing as a native Hawaiian,
Mhm.
it was pretty amazing, kind of
Right.
what he did in terms of the Olympics. And
Mhm.
now it's kind of coming full circle here in
Right.
2022, where this is becoming a huge issue in the surfing community.
Right.
And I know
Right.
in Rockaway as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, certainly in Rockaway, you've seen a lot of groups kind of emerge, who are encouraging, underserved kids of color to surf. Part of it is teaching them water safety, how to swim. And part of it is also building a kind of sense of stewardship for the ocean. A lot of the groups, they give free surf lessons, but then they also will sponsor beach cleanups and sort of teach about the ecology of Jamaica Bay and the ocean here. And so I just think that's all to the good. You have generations of kids who've grown up in this neighborhoods who, maybe they live in an enormous high rise, a block or two from the ocean, and they never learned to swim because there aren't public pools, there's no swim program in the public schools. I think that's maybe beginning to change, but they don't grow up with a sense of that that's a place for them, or that that's a sport, that surfing is a sport for them. And so seeing that begin to change, I think is all to the good.
Mhm. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of programs out here in California as
Yeah.
well, bringing inner city kids to the ocean that have never been there, teaching
Right.
them how to swim, teaching them how to surf. And the stewardship piece is obviously, important and interesting to me as a marine scientist. I think surfers, you don't normally think of surfing culture necessarily being invested or aware of
Mhm,
what's happening
mhm,
in the ocean,
mhm,
but
mhm.
I mean, you and I were talking about this. I mean, most surfers I know are grabbing the plastic bags out of the water and shoving
Right.
them in their wetsuit,
Right. Right.
doing the beach cleanups. When I'm
Right.
walking down the beach back to my car, picking up trash,
Mhm.
and just aware of how the ocean is changing.
Right. Right.
We feel when when the water's warmer, we
Right.
feel it.
Right.
When there's new currents that weren't there,
Right.
we feel it.
Right. Right.
And there's an interesting company that's developing a fin called a
Mhm.
smart fin that
Mhm.
you can put on your surfboard that's actually collecting scientific
Oh,
information
that's cool.
about the water
That's really
temperature,
cool. Mhm.
probably dissolved oxygen. I'm not sure what's on their
Mhm.
sensor.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I think it's quite expensive. And I can't imagine too many surfers buying this thing to put
Right.
on their, and who
Right.
knows if it's a good fin or not. But
Right. Well,
there
build
is
that.
this increase in the surfing community. There's a lot of organizations that are really focused on surfing and stewardship
Mhm.
in a new way,
Mhm. Yeah.
which is, it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have a couple more questions, and
Okay.
please keep them coming, everyone. One question from Danielle about those new jetties. Are those jetties going to impact the surf?
Yes, they will, for the better. So
They're going to create
usually
a nice little point break.
they'll create kind of a point. I mean, it's not exactly like a point break, but what ends up happening is that the sand, the sand kind of collects around the jetties, and so it makes a peak, and creates a different, creates sandbars, usually with a little bit more of a slope. So they actually tend to peel a little bit better than some of the other sandbars that are just in the middle. So yes, it will be better. The thing that always wrecks the wave is sort of necessary evil is the sand replenishment. So the beach gets pretty hollowed out during the storms, and then they come and dump a whole lot of sand in, and there literally have been times that the wave is just gone, and it just creates like a bad kind of shore break.
Yep.
Dangerous bone breaking. And so, but they don't do, like, not every beach needs sand at the same time, so you can usually find some other place to go surf until the wave action takes
the natural rhythm, takes it back out to the ocean,
to something else.
Yeah. And now that you've been surfing in Rockaway for 10 years, we're hearing about the New York Harbor, the waters around New York coming back to life in many ways, seeing whales and dolphins, as David coined them, the Gotham whales. They're swimming closer to the beach, and we're seeing more of them. Are you seeing this as well?
Yeah. I mean, so the first time I ever saw a whale breach was that first summer that I lived here, and so it's towards the end of that summer, and I mean, it was just the most spectacular thing I feel I have ever seen in my life, right? I mean, like a cry was ripped from me. I was like, oh, it's a whale, right?
In the water,
like, in the water, like just right there. It's just, they're so big, and I guess it was a humpback, right? Because the sort of the bellows came, and they're just this enormous, like, bellows opening, and it was amazing. So and since then I've seen a number. I hadn't seen any for a number of years, but just these like past 2 to 3 years, I feel like we're seeing more whales again, and dolphins,
eels,
rays. I had, like, I think 2 years ago was the first time that I was sitting in the water, and it was a very clear day. There was not a lot of seaweed or gunk, and I looked down and I saw something moving. I was like, oh, is that seaweed? I was like, oh, that thing has purpose. And I was like, and it was a ray. And I literally had never, ever seen a ray anywhere on the East Coast.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
And the other day I was surfing, and I was walking out with my board, and there's no visibility where I was. And I definitely hit something quite like with my foot walking, quite large and hard, but not like a rock hard. Definitely felt like flesh. And it, out here in California, which is known for our good old the sharks out here, the minute you feel something, see something, you can get pretty spooked. But usually it's just a seal, or probably a ray or a bat ray was my guess that day. The seals do pop up, which is always it's always a treat. Every once in a while we get to see dolphins and whales as well, depending on which beach.
Yeah.
And I've had days where I'll just paddle out, and there were whales breaching. This was off of Pacifica, and I paddled out, forgot about the surf, and sat on my board and watched the whales breaching.
No, it's incredible. It's like a nature show in your backyard. I love it.
And we're definitely fortunate. We've got about 10 more minutes. So I had a couple more questions, just kind of about, if you can tell us about kind of what's coming next for you, any new projects. I know there's rumors of a movie are still in the works.
Yes. So there is, Netflix has optioned the book for a film, and there's like sort of a team attached, including Kerry Washington, who, at least at the moment, her plan is to play me. And there's a writer who's been working on a script, and we're just waiting to see that, and then
And
see what happens.
Is Carrie a surfer?
No, but it's interesting. She is her family are all swimmers, and so she actually said one of the things that she appealed to her is that she has that relationship to the ocean because she and her family have always swum. The other thing is she grew up in New York, as did I, and she's the child of educators, as am I, and she went to a similar kind of New York City private school. So we have some sort of funny little things in common. So I'm just waiting to see. I have very hopeful, but who knows? Who knows?
And how did
Hollywood.
you know yeah, who knows? That's on a whole nother timeline.
Yeah.
How did she hear about the book?
So she got the book through my agent. My agent sent it to someone that he knows who's a producer, and that person shared it with her, and
she read it.
She read it and said yes. So it's all very exciting. And in the meantime, I do a little bit of corporate writing here and there, mostly for kind of energy tech companies. So sort of related to my last beat at the New York Times, and and I'm sort of noodling around with trying to figure out another book, either book or documentary or both, sort of surfing related, but we'll see what comes of that.
Okay, very exciting.
Yeah. But I found that I did find that I loved, well, I much of my book writing, I was nervous and whatever. I mean, I also did love it, and loved having just one sort of thing to really kind of dive into and kind of not emerge until I was done with it. And I liked that. I like that sort of life. I'd go spend hours and hours and hours, actually a number of days, at the map room at the New York City Public Library, like looking at historic maps of Rockaway and trying to figure out like how these neighborhoods fit together and where my house would have been, and who might live there. And so, and I was a history major in college. And so I found that I really loved that kind of research and thinking and kind of storytelling. And so would love to find some kind of project that would sustain me in the same way, but not about me. That's the one thing I know.
Okay. That was my next question. Is it going to be a memoir?
Yeah, whatever my next project is, I would like it really, really to not be about me.
Well, that whole idea of storytelling, which obviously we're focused on books in this group, films is another medium, is so critical around all topics, and especially around the ocean for those that don't have access, that haven't been in the ocean or below the surface.
Right.
Being able to tell those stories and inspire people, which I think your book definitely does, is so critical, and why we're so excited to bring together all these different writers and writers, filmmakers, telling those stories in different ways is so critical to get people excited and inspired about this.
Yeah. Well, I just think, the ocean can be intimidating, and trying to break into, a sport like surfing can be intimidating. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be surfing, right? But I think, kind of finding your way into new things can be kind of scary unless you have some kind of guide or roadmap, or, someone who shows you the way.
Someone who takes you.
Yeah.
Or get inspired in some way.
Yeah.
And wonderful. Well, I want to thank you so much, Diane. This was a pleasure to talk about your book, to talk about surfing. I can't wait for you to come to the West Coast so we can go
Me too.
surfing together.
I know. I want to go back to Bolinas. Jealous of all of you.
We've got a
Well,
few
this
good
is great.
spots.
Yeah.
Yes, and thank you. And
Thank you
keep
so
us
much.
posted on your next projects.
Okay.
And thank you for everyone for joining today.
All right. Great. Thanks so
Bye.
much. Take care.
You too.